Ravi was a quiet and hardworking man who lived in a small coastal town. He worked as a mechanic in a little garage at the corner of the street. Every morning before sunrise, he would walk to his shop with his old lunchbox, wipe the dust off the tools, and begin his work. Life for him was simple and peaceful, but very lonely. He didn't have a family anymore. His parents had passed away years ago, and though he had some friends at the garage, they never truly respected him. They would often laugh at him for being too shy, too innocent, or too kind. They would say, "Ravi, you are almost 30 and still alone. Who will ever marry you?" He would smile awkwardly and stay silent. He didn't like arguments, and he believed that kindness always wins in the end, but not everyone understood that. Some of his coworkers found his kindness funny. They loved to play jokes on him. Sometimes they would hide his lunch. Sometimes they would make him do their work, and sometimes they would call him names. Ravi never complained. He just kept working, believing that one day people would see his true heart. One evening, after a long, tiring day at work, a few of his so-called friends invited him to a nearby gathering. They said it was a small celebration for someone's birthday. Ravi was surprised, but also happy. He didn't get invited to parties often, so he washed his face, changed into a clean shirt, and decided to go. He thought maybe they were finally trying to be friendly. The celebration was being held at a community hall near the market. There were lights hanging from the ceiling, music playing, and people laughing. Ravi felt nervous but smiled as he walked in. Everyone welcomed him with wide grins that seemed too strange to him, but he ignored the feeling. Soon one of the men clapped his hands and said loudly, "Everyone, we have a surprise for Ravi." The people laughed and turned to look at him. Ravi stood there confused, not knowing what was happening. Then through the crowd a young woman was brought forward. She looked frightened and uncomfortable. Her name was Li Mei. She was a Chinese woman who had recently come to the town. She didn't speak the local language very well, and most people only knew a few things about her. Rumors said that she had come from another country to live with her boyfriend, but he had left her alone when she was expecting a baby. No one knew the full truth, but gossip spread quickly. Ravi looked at her, unsure what to do. His friends began whispering and laughing. Then one of them said, "Ravi, we found you a bride. Tonight you are getting married." Everyone burst out laughing. Ravi thought they were joking, but before he could say anything, someone placed a flower garland around his neck. Another person took Li Mei's hand and placed it in his. The crowd started clapping and cheering, pretending it was a wedding. Li Mei's eyes filled with tears. She looked completely lost and embarrassed. Ravi felt his face turn red as everyone laughed louder. He tried to explain that it was all a misunderstanding, but no one listened. Someone shouted, "Smile, Ravi! You're married now." The laughter grew stronger. For everyone there, it was just a joke, a cruel joke to make fun of a kind man who never fought back. But for Ravi, it was something else. He looked at the young woman standing beside him, trembling, tears running down her face. He saw the pain in her eyes, the humiliation she was feeling, and his heart broke. When the party was finally over, people began to leave. Some patted him on the back, still laughing, while others teased him about his marriage. Li Mei stood quietly in a corner, not knowing where to go. Ravi slowly walked up to her and said softly, "Don't cry. I know this was wrong. I'm sorry for what they did." She didn't understand all his words, but she could feel the warmth in his tone. Through broken English and hand gestures, she tried to tell him that she had no place to stay. Her small rented room had been locked because she couldn't pay the rent, and she had no one to help her. Ravi felt a deep ache in his chest. This woman, already hurt by life, had now been made a joke by people who had no heart. That night, Ravi couldn't sleep. He sat by the window thinking about everything that had happened. He remembered her frightened face, her quiet sobs, and the way people laughed as if it meant nothing. He realized that if he didn't help her, she would have no one. The next morning, he went to find her. She was sitting near the market, holding a small bag with a few clothes inside. Her eyes were tired and she looked weak. When Ravi saw her, he walked over and said gently, "Come with me. You can stay in my house for some time. It's small but safe." She hesitated at first, unsure if she should trust him, but the kindness in his eyes was something she hadn't seen in a long time. Slowly she nodded. Together they walked to his home, a small one-room house near the sea. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and peaceful. Ravi gave her the bed and slept on the floor that night. He made her tea, cooked some rice, and told her not to worry about anything. Even though she couldn't understand every word, she could feel his sincerity. Days turned into weeks. Ravi would wake up early, prepare breakfast for her, and then go to work. When he returned, he would bring vegetables or something sweet to share. He never asked her about her past, and he never treated her like a burden. The people in the neighborhood began whispering again. Some said unkind things. They said Ravi had lost his mind, that he was living with a stranger. But he didn't care. He knew what he was doing was right. One evening, when he came home from work, he found her crying softly. She showed him a picture of a man on her phone, her boyfriend who had left her. Ravi sat quietly listening to her broken words. She said she had believed that man would marry her, but he disappeared, leaving her with nothing. Ravi didn't say much. He just handed her a cup of water and said, "You don't need to be afraid anymore. You're safe here." That simple sentence made her cry even more, not out of sadness, but because for the first time in months, someone had spoken to her with kindness, not judgment. A few days later, she told him through gestures that she wanted to help around the house. She began cleaning, cooking, and even tried to learn a few local words. Ravi smiled whenever she tried to speak his language, and slowly, a quiet friendship began to grow between them. One afternoon, when Ravi's old friends came by his house, they were shocked. They saw Lime sitting on the porch smiling politely and Ravi fixing her chair. They joked again, but this time Ravi didn't laugh. He simply said, "She's staying here because she needs a home. Please don't make fun of her again." His calm but firm voice silenced them for the first time. That night, as he sat by the lamp fixing an old clock, Ravi thought about how strange life could be. The people who called him weak had forced him into something as a joke. But that same joke had given him a reason to care, to protect, and to show love without expecting anything in return. He didn't know what the future would bring. He didn't know if Lime would ever love him, or if she would leave someday. But deep down, he felt that fate had brought her into his life for a reason. That night, before going to sleep, he whispered a silent promise to himself, that no matter what people said, he would never let anyone hurt her again. And from that moment, what started as a cruel joke began to turn into something quietly beautiful, a story that neither of them had expected, but both needed in their own way. Time passed slowly but peacefully in Ravi's small home by the sea. The days were quiet, filled with the sound of the waves and the smell of salt in the air. Lime was now more comfortable living there. She smiled more often, and though her English was still broken, she could communicate enough to make their daily life easier. Ravi treated her with great respect. He never asked her about her past unless she wanted to talk. He spoke softly, always careful with his words, and tried to make her feel like she belonged. Whenever he went to work, he left a small note on the table, sometimes just one word like eat, rest, or smile. She would keep those notes in a small box, like tiny treasures that reminded her she was not alone anymore. Months passed, and soon Lime gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. It was a stormy night when the baby came. The wind howled and the rain hit the windows hard. Ravi rushed her to the nearby clinic on his old motorbike. He held her hand the entire way, telling her not to be afraid. When the baby cried for the first time, Ravi's heart melted. He stood there watching the little bundle wrapped in a white cloth. Lime was weak and tired, but when Ravi placed the baby beside her, she smiled through her tears. "What will you name her?" he asked softly. Lime looked at him and whispered, "Malin. It means beautiful jade." Ravi repeated the name slowly. Malin. It sounded like music to his ears. From that moment, he felt something deep inside him change. He was not just a lonely man anymore. He had a reason to live, to protect, to love. After they returned home, Ravi took extra care of both of them. He woke up early every day, made breakfast, and went to work. But no matter how tired he was, he always came back with a smile. In the evenings, he would hold baby Malin in his arms and talk to her softly, as if she could understand every word. Sometimes he would hum songs while fixing things around the house. And Lime would watch quietly, her eyes full of emotion. She couldn't believe how kind he was. In a world that had been cruel to her, Ravi's gentle heart was a miracle. People in the town began to notice their bond. Some still gossiped, saying unkind things. They called Ravi foolish for raising another man's child. But Ravi never replied to them. He only said, "A child is never a mistake. Every child deserves love." His calmness silenced many. Li Mei slowly began to recover. She learned more English from Ravi, and in return she taught him a few Chinese words. Their conversations were often full of laughter, because they mixed both languages and gestures. The house, once quiet and lonely, was now filled with warmth and laughter. As months turned into years, Malin grew up healthy and cheerful. She called Ravi Papa, even though she didn't know he wasn't her real father. For her, he was everything, her protector, her teacher, her whole world. Whenever Ravi came home from work, Malin would run toward him, shouting happily. He would lift her up in his arms and laugh like a young boy. Li Mei often stood by the doorway watching them together, her heart full of gratitude. She knew how lucky she was to have found a man like him. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky orange, Ravi sat outside fixing a small bicycle he had bought for Malin's 3rd birthday. Li Mei brought him tea and sat beside him. For a moment they didn't speak. The sound of waves filled the silence between them. Then she said softly, "Ravi, you are a good man. You gave me and Malin a life when no one else would." Ravi looked at her and smiled shyly. "I didn't do anything special. I just did what my heart told me." Li Mei looked down and said, "I was afraid of love. I thought it only brought pain. But you showed me it can be gentle." Those words stayed with Ravi for a long time. He didn't say much, but deep inside, he knew he loved her, not out of pity, but with pure and honest feelings. Years passed peacefully. Malin started school, and Ravi worked harder than ever to make sure she had everything she needed. Sometimes, when the days were long and tiring, he would look at her drawings pinned on the wall, little hearts, houses, and stick figures labeled Papa, Mama, and Malin. It gave him strength to keep going. One day, something unexpected happened. One of Ravi's old friends, the same man who had started the cruel joke years ago, came to his garage. Ravi was fixing a car when he looked up and recognized him. The man seemed embarrassed and nervous. "Ravi," he said quietly, I wanted to say sorry. What we did that night was wrong. We didn't know what kind of man you really were. You turned that joke into something beautiful." Ravi put down his wrench and looked at him calmly. He didn't hold anger anymore. "It's okay," he said. "Life has its own ways of teaching people. That night gave me a family. Maybe it was meant to happen." The man nodded, his eyes soft with guilt. He saw Malin running outside the garage laughing, and he smiled sadly. "You really love them, don't you?" Ravi smiled. "Yes, with all my heart." That evening, when Ravi returned home, Li Mei noticed something different in his expression. "What happened?" she asked. He shook his head and said, "An old friend came to say sorry. I forgave him," she smiled gently. "You have a big heart, Ravi." He looked at her, his eyes calm and full of warmth. "When you love people, forgiveness becomes easy." Their life continued in quiet happiness. They never had much money, but their home was full of peace and love. On weekends, they would walk along the beach, Malin collecting shells while Ravi and Li Mei watched her play. Sometimes they would sit together, sharing tea and stories, the sunset reflecting in their eyes. One evening, Malin came to Ravi and asked, "Papa, did you love Mama when you first met her?" Ravi smiled, surprised by her question. "Love takes time, little one," he said gently. "Sometimes it hides behind pain, but if you're patient, it shows itself." Li Mei, who was listening from the kitchen, felt her eyes fill with tears. She realized that what started as a painful joke had turned into a story of grace and courage. Many years later, when Malin grew older and learned the truth about how her parents met, she was shocked. She couldn't believe that a prank could bring two broken people together. She once asked her father, "Weren't you angry that they tricked you?" Ravi smiled and said, "At first, yes. But then I realized something. Life gives us unexpected chances." That night, everyone else saw a joke, but I saw a woman who needed love and a baby who needed protection. If that was a mistake, then I never want to be right. Li Mei stood beside him, holding his hand. Her eyes glistened as she whispered, "You were my angel when the world turned its back on me." From then on, Ravi's story became known in their town. People who once laughed at him now respected him deeply. They said he was proof that love could grow even from pain, and kindness could turn any darkness into light. Years later, when Ravi grew old and his hair turned gray, he would often sit on the same porch where he once fixed Malin's bicycle. He watched her play with her own children, and Li Mei would sit beside him, still holding his hand. He often said softly, You know, Lee May, they forced me to marry you as a joke. But you became my greatest blessing. And every time, she would smile, lean her head on his shoulder, and say, sometimes love doesn't come the way we expect, it comes the way we need. And in that small seaside home, where laughter once turned into love, Ravi and Lee May spent their lives proving that real kindness can heal even the deepest wounds.